you haven't noticed, Cantor and I, we like to have fun up here. You know, we like to joke around. And we even sometimes like to joke around about sermons. Now, I have to tell you, my favorite sermon joke personally is from a movie, from the 1960 movie Pollyanna. It's not a Jewish sermon. Basically the joke is that people listen to the sermon and they wish they hadn't. But I feel like more Jewish sermon jokes are usually about people not listening. I feel like I could say any number of things about the Jewish Journal right now. But it's important to joke around about sermons sometimes because sermons are the most serious part of the service. In sermons, we address issues that are essential and troubling. We bring hope and inspiration. So it's important to remember to have fun. And the idea of people not listening to the sermon, I feel like I was saying, is the most common theme in Jewish sermon jokes. But for some reason, the sermon format remains, not just in Jewish tradition, but in a variety of religious traditions. It works to communicate information, shockingly. Despite any jokes about not listening, a lot of you really listened to what I said last week. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for all your questions. This actually, I have not experienced this before this week right now, but there were enough questions and interest that I want to follow up today on some of the things that I said last week. So to review, what we were speaking about last week, I was talking about my time in Israel, not this past week, but the week before that, and I was focusing on the importance of voting in the World Zionist Congress. Okay, so question number 1 that came up after this, how do you sign up, and when is the vote? Okay, so Jewish logistics, a little give or take on that. So I wanted to clarify, after Shabbos, this is what you have to do. Google the following, Vote Merkaz 2025. So Merkaz is spelled M-E-R-C-A-Z. Vote Merkaz 2025, and that will get you a sign up to a reminder to vote, because we can't quite register yet because, Jewish logistics. Okay. So the polls are scheduled to open March 10, 2025, Bezrat Hashem. Elections were supposed to be held last year, but because of the war, things got delayed. So that's what we're going for. We don't yet have a sign up, but we can sign up for a reminder to vote. And you can do that by Googling Vote Merkaz 2025 after Shabbat, and then clicking on the link, and you'll sign up. It'll be great. Okay. Also, the eligibility for who can vote in the World Zionist Congress, vote for a slate, it's Jewish logistics, right? It's articulated a little bit differently in each place. So I think that the requirements is the common threads that I can follow on the different websites. In order to vote, you have to self-identify as Jewish and not be part of any other religion. You have to be over the age of 18, and you also have to not vote in Israel. If you vote in Israel, you cannot vote in the World Zionist Congress elections. Okay, so that's the first set of questions. Then there were a set of, I think, really 3 different main questions about orthodoxy and military service in Israel, about being Orthodox in Israel, serving in the military in Israel. And these questions came up, and there were, I think, multiple questions about them because these issues in Israeli culture and in Israeli society, they're complex. They're nuanced. They're even, I might use the word, complicated. And I'm not trying to use encoded language here. It's just complicated. I can tell from your questions and feedback. And also, these answers that I'm giving right now to the questions that have already been asked, it's the sermon format, right? It's not interactive. Marla and I have actually already spoken about creating some additional spaces outside sermons for discussion in the near future, hopefully Shabbaton, maybe a lunch and learn. But in the theme of starting somewhere, let's dive in. Okay, so question number 1. Rabbi, did you say last week that everyone who's Orthodox in Israel doesn't serve in the army? No, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think I was clear enough last week, so I apologize for that. But let me be clear, some people who are Orthodox in Israel do serve in the army, and some do not. This is controversial in Israeli society, as far as I can tell. And like any political division, this controversy inspires big feelings, I think, for everyone on the political spectrum. Let me be clear also, the Orthodox, in my personal opinion, and I think according to reality, the Orthodox are not bad people. Of course, their views are very different from mine. Sometimes that's like, okay, it's different, and sometimes it's like, wow, that's uncomfortable. But having different political views and living a different life, it doesn't make you a bad person from me or for anyone else. And that's something that is, I think, difficult and important for us to remember regarding politics in the country where we live, as well as the politics and the religious issues in Israel. Okay, so a little bit of clarification on that. The modern Orthodox, also known as Dati Leumi, which translates roughly to religious nationalist, that part of the Orthodox community, it is standard to serve in the army. Yes, they do serve in the army. Now, the Haredi Orthodox, many in that community do not serve in the army, but some do, and this is changing. So I heard some feedback last week after I spoke, some people saying I have Haredi family in Israel and they do not serve in the army and they never served in the army. And then some feedback saying I have a Haredi family in Israel and they have been serving in the army. In fact, they have been since October 7th. They're very involved. So people in the Haredi community who are serving in the army, this is a thing, but it's a new or newer thing. I heard about two specific things in the past weeks. Nachal Haredi, a Haredi military unit, so a military unit where people who have different, I want to say, religious needs can be accommodated in terms of Shabbat, in terms of kashrut, in terms of separation between men and women. They have to be in a separate unit to have their needs accommodated, but it is a unit that is doing military service. And apparently also, and I actually heard this from a colleague in Israel, a new acronym, Chardal, which means Haredi Dati Leumi. This is Haredi religious nationalist. This definitely did not always exist, but it's a new thing that exists. So hooray for cultural diversity. We love that story. Okay. So about the people in the Haredi community who don't serve in the army. Lots of questions I heard about that. So this is a little bit controversial. And why is this controversial? A couple of different reasons. First, because the children of those families are not going into the military and risking their lives in the same way as children who are Dati Leumi or who are secular and who are going into military service that can be very dangerous. Now, also, the Haredi community in general can be controversial in Israel because of their economic impact. These communities have a lot of children, creating an increased need for social services and financial support. And the parents in these families, they don't go work in high tech usually. They focus on raising their children, and many of the men focus on full-time Torah study, which does not create an economic benefit in the same way as working in high tech might. Now, does this mean this community is full of bad people? Of course not. Of course not. They certainly disagree with me and they live their life a different way than I live my life, but that doesn't make them bad. And I think it's really important to remember that when people make political choices, they're pretty much always trying to do the right thing. You know, I think that I'll remind myself and I'll remind anyone else who needs this reminder that in this country, for example, both Republicans and Democrats are trying to do the right thing. They're going about it in different ways. So another question that I received after I spoke last week, why is it that people who are Haredi Orthodox are not serving in the army? Okay, they're studying Torah full-time because they believe this is the best way for them to contribute. Now, again, I'm giving a blanket answer on behalf of a whole bunch of people. I'm sure that if you spoke to many individuals, you'd get different answers, but that's the general answer. They're studying Torah full-time because they feel like this is the best way for them to contribute to the health and safety and security of Israel. I was thinking about explaining this morning, and I'm sure many of us have seen people who go around with tefillin and say, they try to find Jewish people who are like, hey, have you put on tefillin today? You know, and then it's like, okay, great. So now they put on, it's like, oh, we've done a mitzvah, this is great. You know, why would someone do this? Because they think it's important, because they're trying to contribute to Jewish observance, and you know, it might be something different than any of us in this room have done, but the purpose is that this person who's doing this is trying to do the right thing. Very interesting question that I'm still not sure how to answer, but I want to try. Are the Haredim who don't serve in the army conscientious objectors? Are they conscientious objectors? Okay, so now I'm thinking, you know, I'm not so familiar with Haredi culture in Israel or conscientious objectors, so I'm doing my research and trying to figure this out. And I saw on the internet that the Selective Service System of the United States defines conscientious objector as one who is opposed to serving in the armed forces and or bearing arms on the grounds of moral or religious principles. So I feel like, you know, the studying Torah full-time instead of going into military service, it probably does meet that definition in the strictest sense, but I feel like it has a different connotation and also a different meaning because it's an entire community and not individuals. So I hesitate at the comparison even if perhaps it is strictly accurate according to the words of the definition, because not only are the connotations very different, but the societies are very different. Okay, now, Acharon Chaviv, the last question, the dearest to me. I just love this question, and I actually wrote about this a little bit in the e-blast because I love this question so much. Rabbi, why aren't you talking about the Torah portion? Many teachers of varying religious traditions have taught that any person who's giving a sermon should sermonize with a chumash in one hand and a newspaper on the other. Maybe like a phone full of podcasts in the other, not on Shabbos, but there's this balance between teaching what's in the Torah and the Tanakh and current events. And especially since October 7th, and especially since we are a proud and strong Zionist community, sermons have focused on current events. Let me remind us, and I don't want to say this because it pains me, this is not a normal time. We're at war. This is not normal. I have been teaching briefly about the Torah portion every week on Shabbos before the Torah reading begins, and I feel personally that this is especially important because we follow the triennial cycle in our Torah reading. We don't lane the whole portion every week. But the practice, which is observed by many, of doing backflips to make a connection between the Torah portion and current events in a sermon, it's not necessarily my style, but just for fun. This week's Torah portion, which we know as Vayeishev, tells the story of Joseph's life. Joseph is sold into slavery, ends up in the household of Potiphar, the chief steward of Pharaoh. There, as is usual for his life, he's profoundly successful. Potiphar appoints him master of the household, and God blesses Potiphar's household on account of Joseph. Then, Potiphar's wife approaches Joseph. She propositions him, and he refuses, even though he could have taken the easy way out and said yes to having an affair. He said no, because he chose to do the right thing. So next spring, God willing, on March 10th, each of us will have a choice between taking the easy way out or choosing to do the right thing. It's definitely easier to ignore the World Zionist Congress. After all, it might feel like it has nothing to do with our day-to-day life. But we must choose to do the right thing, to take the time and make the effort to vote. Because it's the right thing to do, to stand up, to be counted, and to be heard. Shabbat Shalom.